ECHL, and anything underneath. Scott Cowan, Sebastian High, our prospect heroes.
The prospect heroes Scott and Sebastian on Puck and Roll.
All right, Scott and Sebastian, welcome to the show, guys.
How's it going, Patrick?
Sebastian, we're going to start with you. Now, I believe you still have a list to complete. You've read it 50 times. You checked it 40 times. I think your due diligence is even more impressive than Santa Claus himself. And of course, we're talking about the latest draft picks for the Montreal Canadiens. So let's go ahead and complete this list, Sebastian. What do you got for us this week?
Well, like the three players that I have notes written up for, I'm not sure if I'm going to get to all of them, but it's the three defensemen that the Habs picked back to back in the middle of the draft. Those would be Dmitry Kostenko, William Trudeau, and Daniil Sobolev. These are three very different defensemen. They have very different strengths. We have one offensive defenseman, one two-way defenseman, one defensive defenseman. And interestingly, go ahead.
I'm so sorry. Interestingly, one of these picks is considered a Russian football player, according to Google.
Kostenko is indeed also a Russian football player, which is wonderful. Like a 28-year-old Russian football player who the Habs just needed. You need a football playing defenseman, right?
You need that strength. You need that strength.
A feat of strength.
Need that massive frame.
The only thing, though, I'm just afraid of all the penalties for embellishment he might take, but that's a whole other story. I'm sorry to.
Whoa.
Yeah,
football, not soccer. Whoa. I love all three sports, though, so it's kind of like shooting myself in the foot here, but yeah.
I'm sorry, Sebastian. Please continue.
So speaking of the football playing Kostenko, this is probably the player of the three that I'm least enamored with in terms of like the draft pick. So he was drafted really for his offense and specifically for his goal scoring, which is a bit of an interesting thing to say considering he only scored 2 goals last season, split between the MHL, which is the Russian equivalent of like the CHL, so like OHL, QMJHL, all that.
So
he also played
KHL's ECHL in a sense too, if you want to do technical.
Also, it's kind of both, but it's also used as a junior league. It's like it's not a 1-to-1 comparison, but he played most of his games in the VHL, which is the equivalent of the AHL. So it's real professional hockey. It's painful to watch. Like there isn't much of a system. It's just like you play, and doesn't matter if it's cohesive in any way. But so
almost like a beer. So you're telling me the VHL is essentially a beer league?
With no coaching, basically, but talented players. So it's strange to watch.
The KHL doesn't have the best reputation for its on-ice
product.
How to say its on-ice actions, and the VHL just kind of is the trickle-down effect from that. So yeah.
But you mentioned also that he was He's also part of the. Well, he did stints at the MHL, which is a league that Alexander Romanov actually played for as well.
Exactly.
Right? Yeah.
Exactly. So it's again like players coming from Russia. Basically, any player you draft that even plays in the KHL has spent time in both the VHL and the MHL. Like you see, like a ton of movement, right? So Kostenko is an offensive defenseman. He has a really booming shot, but like think about like Ben Sherratt in the offensive zone of like only ever shooting. Like every time he gets the puck at the blue line, he shoots, and it's frustrating because like you see an open player, like an actual goal scorer, and he just doesn't pass, which is kind of the same thing with Kostenko. And I watched him a little bit before the draft because I was watching a player I adored, which was Fyodor Svechkov. And in terms of point tallies, Kostenko and Svechkov are pretty similar, both in the VHL and the MHL. But at the same time, I didn't love the pick because like Kostenko is an adventure in the defensive zone. He never has his stick on the ice. He doesn't have like smart habits. He's not very aware of his surroundings. He misses reads constantly. It's pretty frustrating to watch him. He does have a penchant for like a very like highlight reel play every once in a while. So like you see some people comparing him to Norlinder, which I disagree with.
Most Canadian fans will be aware of Kostenko because he has appeared in YouTube at times and highlight reel videos and stuff like that. So
is there someone in history, however, that you you can maybe compare him to, because I don't know, you're telling me a guy who's shooting constantly, who's a defensive liability. I'm going old school here. I'm thinking guys like Al Frady, for example,
I'd say he's more like Gaston Gingras in that his shot is 50-50 whether it'll hit the net or whether it'll hit the boards, but he still has that big booming release at the end of the day.
It's a big booming release, but he's also not a very good skater. He lacked some like hockey IQ, which is why it's not a swing I would have taken, but it's a boom or bust selection in that the chance of it like booming are small, but I think there's a better chance of him being a top 4 guy than a bottom than like a like top 6 guy.
Well, then, Sebastian, one last thing before you move on to the next prospect. Then, if you're telling me that you seem a little reluctant about giving this guy any praise, so to speak, he has been picked in the 3rd round. So, is he just a product of what we like to call the COVID draft, where everyone kind of chose blindly after the first round, or
I mean, played,
or maybe
played.
I'm guessing the scouts saw something for him to be drafted
okay.
so high.
So the reason for him being drafted so high, you do have these highlight reel plays. You do have this big shot, and you see Montreal, especially with like losing Shea Weber, perhaps long term. This is something I saw in the draft, like drafting Mailloux, for instance, is wanting a defenseman who can shoot, right, and like actually shoot. I mean, like Kostenko isn't a big guy; he's 6 foot, 168. He's also really old for his draft class. He's almost eligible for last draft. But he has flashes, right? It's just they're so inconsistent. So if you're drafting, I'm like, okay, I see these great flashes, and we're gonna try to make these like more common. Then sure, he's also a right shot defenseman, and after losing Cale Fleury and Noah Juleson and Shea Weber, you want to reinforce that right side of defense because apart from like this draft class, the only right defense prospect that Montreal had was Josh Brook. So there are reasons. It's just not a swing I would have taken.
All right, I think a fun comparison to make really quick with Kostenko is if for defensive Laval Rocket is Nikita Zhepilov, who played for the Rocket as Latvian-born forward. Zhepilov was an on-ice liability a lot, but he also gave Rocket fans those highlight reel plays that put fans in their seats when he did produce. And I think for Canadiens fans, I think it's fair to say that Kostenko could fit that similar bill, as he is a player who has found himself on highlight reels more often than not.
Yeah, that's fair.
Sebastian, next guy on the list.
William Trudeau. So this is a really fun one. It's kind of a wholesome story. So Trudeau wasn't on any draft lists, even like in like November. So he really skyrocketed up rankings this season. So like he didn't make the top 350 of Central Scouting for North America in like September, but I think he was like 120th or something in December. So it really was just this season. And he was playing on a really stacked Charlottetown Islanders team. And he kind of played second fiddle behind a player who was picked last season, Cormier.
Yeah, Lucas Cormier.
Yeah, exactly. And while Cormier was taking on the power play, Trudeau was the penalty killing, stable. He's basically he's decent at everything, but he kind of lacks that standout skill. So I think it's a pretty safe bet that he's going to make the NHL at some point. I just maybe he can be a really solid like 5th defenseman, 6th defenseman. But like he's a smart player. Like he's really smart in the D zone.
I was actually just about to interject and say exactly that. I think what was impressive about the Trudeau pick was the fact that, well, first of all, everyone was wowed at the fact that he has a really high hockey IQ. His skills are definitely there, but again, this is another defenseman where he's got cement in his skates and he just he doesn't move. However, again, NHL Central Scouting ranked him number 68.
Yeah. He's a good player. He also put up 31 points in 40 games for the Charlottetown Islanders. He's also a bit older for the draft class, but the development curve is really, really promising, right? Like if you look at a player, like you much rather draft a player who was on no one's list a year ago, but on everyone's list now versus someone that like kind of dropped off this last season, because it shows there might not seem to be too much upside right now, but that upside could still come into play, right? He might gain a standout ability with time. And I think if he does gain a standout ability, it will be his defensive play. He's really aggressive defensively. He engages on the rush. He can suffocate play really well. He's a really good player that in say 10 years, if you have him on your third pairing and he's the guy that you want to help a younger defenseman come into the league with, right? Of trying to kind of protect the younger player. If Trudeau was 10 years older and an established okay NHL player, I would want to play Romanov or Norlinder with him because he has that steadying capability of just calming things down. He's not a great skater, but he is pretty effective in transition, in getting the puck out of the zone because he's smart. He knows what kind of lanes to choose and how to shift his weight to just manipulate the opposing players. So it's a pick I actually quite appreciated because it's homegrown, underdog. It's fun.
It's I think
I will agree. I'll let you go.
No, go ahead, Scott. Go right ahead.
I just wanted to make a quick point about the Islanders. That's another thing to mention that's pretty interesting with Trudeau is that he's proven that he plays really well when he's given really high offensive players to play with. The Islanders last season were one of the GHL's best offensive teams, if not the league's best offensive team, with Cedric Desruisseaux, who is a current Laval Rocket player, winning the QMJHL's top scorer award. Thomas Casey finishing second on team scoring of 74 points over 38 games. The Islanders had a high-powered offense, so I definitely think that Trudeau can have offensive upside if he's put with the right people.
I was actually going to say something along those lines, Scott, and I appreciate the comment. The difference with me, though, is I don't have stats on top of my head like you guys do. I was going to make a soft comparison.
I have notes.
Oh, fine. I came unprepared. I'm sorry. I actually, because I was thinking about, his style and everything and how he fits in, and I really appreciate the comment about how he fits well with an offensive player. The Canadians are actually the defensive core was because now Weber is gone. The whole situation shifted a bit. You had Sherratt with Weber, a defensive-minded defenseman with someone who was more inclined to go offensively. Same thing with Edmondson and Petrie. It was kind of like that same connection and everything. So you never know. Maybe he can make it, and it would be an absolutely amazing story. Sebastian, we're gonna have to keep the rest of the picks for next week because we have a lot more to talk about. I know you're very disappointed, but I'm sure Scott is getting annoyed that you're hogging all the spotlight here, and you guys must have a shared segment. Scott, before we talk about the Lyon Le Trois-Rivières, we know there's a couple of signatures that that stood out that you want to talk about. There is one player in particular that you've been pretty high about because you're also a big sap for successful stories and underdogs and everything. I mean, we all love Rocky. Let's be honest here. Olivier Archambault, this is the guy you want to talk about. Go ahead.
I've been following Archambault on and off since 2016, which might shock a lot of people considering most people barely know who this guy is.
Yo.
But when I first got into writing hockey, he was one of the first guys I kind of picked up on coming out of the ECHL. I was following Trevor Gillies when he was playing with the South Carolina Stingrays because I was a big fan of him. He was a former NHL enforcer. And Archambault was one of the top scorers on that team in his final season in that league. And ever since then, I've kind of just been following him on and off, seeing where he's gone. And then things kind of came full circle this past off season when he signed with the Canadiens organization in a fashion, as he signed a one-year deal with the Trois-Rivières Lyon. If you wanted to make a fair comparison here, Archambault is definitely an Alex Belzile type, not really in terms of his playing style, but more so in terms of his career path. Archambault has been all over the map to get to where he is right now, but I think he'll finally have that stability that he really just has never really found at the professional level in Trois-Rivières, with a new team and a new market, new fan base, new everything pretty much. Archambault went unsigned for all of 2020-21. He contemplated some overseas options. There were some good articles written about that in La Presse, which talked about him considering going overseas, but ultimately he decided to stay in North America once more. And he's actually a point-per-game player in 2019-20 with the Allen Americans. But what most people remember him for is two things. One is that he was a former draft pick of the Canadiens, a fifth-round pick in a fourth-round pick in 2011, and most Canadiens fans will know him because he's typically brought up in the conversation of players of homegrown picks that just didn't work out. Now, while that's exactly what happened, as Archambault's entire time with the Canadiens organization amounted to 10 games with the Hamilton Bulldogs, I still think he's a super talented player. And there was a brief time where he actually managed to crack the AHL full-time for at least half a season. When the Syracuse Crunch were faced with a number of injuries, he was given a shot off a PTO and posted 18 points over 29 games.